Welcome, everyone, to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. Find them at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your questions and comments. Please use DJ at ArtistFirst.com. And now, here they are. It's the legendary Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Legendary?
Thank you.
I think that would be rumored. We've been absent.
Yes.
we've been illin.
Yeah, we've been out of the loop for a bit.
But we are back now, and we are going to take this opportunity to avoid all contention.
I didn't realize we had contention going.
Me neither. But no, we're going to avoid it anyway. We're going to attempt for a very copacetic show.
I see. Harmonious, perhaps.
Harmonious.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good to me.
Sounds good. So we have to get into harmony. But we are going to talk tonight about contention, and there's a lovely quote in which we can start off with. Not the one we're going to talk about a little bit, but the one right from I believe it's not a commandment, but it's a saying in the Bible. It says, avoid all contention, because basically contention is how you will know it's the agency of the devil, if you want to talk about that. But it's really contention, and we should define our terms. And you mentioned this before the show.
Right.
Contention comes into I think it's in a spectrum of words that people would associate with sort of wrangling or a strife, or being discommodious with each other, being in essence always contrary. Sometimes picking a fight would be contention. You're actually looking for a fight. You're spoiling for a fight. And you mentioned, Margaret, and I think this is another good aspect of contention, is that contention in essence is a drain on your beinghood. It's a way that the ego, or let's just say the pain body, uses to kind of feed itself. It looks for strife. It looks for issues that it can latch onto and then kind of drain your resources. Right.
Well, the definition of contention.
Oh, here we go. Definition.
Okay, from the American Heritage
I don't
Dictionary.
Like that.
You don't want that one?
I like Merriam and Webster.
You want me to try?
No, let's go with American Heritage.
Are you sure?
I'm not going to fight with you. No contention. Go ahead. American Heritage.
Yes, this is what you had said, love. Okay. Oh, my goodness gracious. All right. Synonym is conflict. Second is striving to win in competition or rivalry. And the third is an assertion put forward in argument. Okay, that's the American Heritage. If you want Merriam...
I don't want Merriam.
You told me you want Merriam.
Webster's okay, but Merriam's just,
All right.
Well, I think the dictionary definition is good, but it is also a little bit lacking, because the second one that they espouse there, the idea that it's conflict or strife, is perhaps the most commonly used. Because the third one, the contention, that's more of almost like a legal argument. You're saying, well, I contend that you did so and so, and you have to prove. There's a back and forth there. And I think that of all the three, that's the most innocuous form of contention. And that has the flavor of a debate stage. So.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
There is a definition of contention in telecommunications.
There is. I could go into that. I know a lot about that type of contention.
But what is contention in telecommunications?
Well, In fact, in any protocol system, telecommunications or data communications, contention is when you have a shared resource.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to go off the rails a little bit because you guys asked me, because this is what I do. This is what I actually do.
Okay.
However, when you have the simplest form of contention in telephony is you have a shared line. It's called a party line.
Like
Everyone knows
party
what
line.
a party line was. Or maybe we only know what a party line is. But
well, define party line for those that don't understand what it is.
Back in the way old days, when people talked over wires,
Yes.
way back then with tin cans, you would have some areas, especially in cities, where you would have what was called a party line. And what it was basically was that all your telephones were on one string. It was an electronic string. But if you picked up your telephone and somebody else was on the line having a conversation, you could hear their conversation, and they could hear you. And the contention part of that would say, well, you've been on the line for 20 minutes. Couldn't you get off? I got to call Myrtle. Okay, so you're contending for a resource. Now, in modern day electronic systems and modern day communication systems, there's still contention, but it's rather invisible. Your cell phone and your wireless internet contend for a certain slot in the ether, in the bandwidth that they operate in.
Right.
But they do it seamlessly and sort of invisibly in the background. But there's a whole lot of contention going on in telecommunications in the background. So when my cell phone wants to make a call and there's not enough bandwidth left, that's when it gets dropped, or it gets weird. It gets weird sounding, like, like, what happened there? Well, you were trying to grab a resource that wasn't available, and so you got kind of edged out. You got elbowed out of the resource. That's contention. So it's interesting, but it's quite innocuous. That's the type of contention that you do in a debate stage, where in that case you're really just. And the interesting thing about it is that it's sort of polite. In other words, in telecommunications, you ask for the resource, and somebody says, no, I'm sorry, I'm using it. Then you say, well, can I use this one? And you kind of negotiate. Contention is always resolved by negotiation in protocol systems. Now, with people, contention is sometimes resolved with fisticuffs or screaming or whatever.
Well, there's no ego involved when it's telecommunications.
Correct.
You're just trying to find a way to get through.
And in fact, that type of contention is a cooperative contention. In other words, all of the devices that are trying to get onto the shared resource are talking to each other, first of all, saying whether or not they're going to use the resource and how long and how much. And then if there's no resource left, it usually tries to dissolve the request in an orderly way. It doesn't try to do things abruptly or in such a way to cut things off. So even though your call gets dropped, it's dropped in an orderly way. It just, you say, oh gosh, I lost my call. But all the protocols, all the things that you were trying to go, as you're driving along, you're being handed off cell tower to cell tower to cell tower. Well, the one you got to that didn't have any resource left dropped you. Well, it happens, but it's dropped in a very cooperative way. Mm-hmm. It isn't like Genghis Khan kind of contention where, off with their head, everybody, and that's one way to resolve contention.
Well, it's interesting. That's interesting because that is an example of a resolution of sharing whatever the resource is, without one person overriding. It's just what is possible in the moment.
Right, and you mentioned there's no ego
involved.
And in machines there isn't, but in people, and we should really talk about people. The contention that we're talking about with people is twofold. Okay, you can contend with another in a civil and orderly way. When you see the other sort of contention that you can see that can be normally very orderly is when you see it in a parliament or in some sort of a stage where you have the Robert's Rules of Order. Well, there's so and so would like the floor, and this one gets it for 5 minutes, and you go back and forth, and those are ways of organizing the shared resource, which is the space that we're operating in and everyone's attention. You're trying to share, you're trying to get your viewpoint out into the floor, out into the world, but you can't dominate the conversation and so on, right?
Right.
So this type of contention, when you operate within a rules, within a framework, contention can be resolved based on following the rules. You can say, well, you get your 5 minutes and you don't get interrupted, and so there's a point of order, and you go through all these things, right? So a lot of society is in essence dealing with points of contention. You can also look at economics as dealing with points of contention. Supply and demand is a way of equalizing out, a limited resource. If something is desirable and limited, the way you the feedback loop is the price goes up. So then it becomes less desirable, or you have to say, well, this becomes more precious and therefore worth more money. And similarly in the other direction, if you suddenly have a glut of whatever,
right,
then the price goes down because you have too much.
Supply and demand.
So this contention for resources when resources are scarce versus contention for resources when resources are plentiful is a sort of a feedback loop. They call it the invisible hand, in economics, and it works the law of supply and demand is truly a law in the sense that it works very. It works in an invisible way, much like the telephone works in an invisible way to contend for that resource. But people, we get back to people. People are unreasonable. People,
have opinions.
People have opinions, but and that's a good one because we've probably all run into somebody whose opinion is espoused in such a way as to try and shut out all other opinions.
Right.
That anybody else who's disagreeing gets met with a tremendous amount of blowback and emotion and how could you and what could you think of, and all this kind of go ahead.
It becomes a personal thing for that moment, and
the ego gets involved.
Well, it feels like a personal attack. And so what they do is it's an automatic hit back. That's where the conflict starts and the beginning of strife. Because now the person wants to fight you as opposed to, I thought it was my turn.
Right. And this is interesting because you deal a lot with the 4-year-olds. And one of the things that you're teaching young people, and 2, 3, 4 years old is the time that you do, is you teach them about shared resources. Here's a toy. Well, everyone wants to play with a toy, or at least 2 people want to play with a toy at the same time.
Right.
Well, then you have a contention. You have a single toy, which is sort of you play with it, then I play with it, and the concept of resolving that contention without having, fisticuffs or screaming.
Without having the screaming, yes.
Right. It is, well, you get it, and how long do you get it, and what will you do with it when you're done, and how you will give it to the other one. And
what we try to do is, first of all, acknowledge that, yes, this is desirable for everybody. It's part of the school, so everybody gets to play. Mm-hmm. But all the kids are like, well, I had it first. Mm-hmm. And so they all understand I had it first. And the rule usually is when you're done playing with it, the other person who gets it next, and it's usually the other person that wants it. And the other person has to acknowledge, okay, I will get it when he's done playing with it or she's done playing with it. But that's when patience is being taught because they have to wait. So they usually figure a way to occupy themselves with something else until it's their turn. And they're getting better at it. I can say that. They realize that they will get a turn with the toy or whatever it is. But if you break the rules somehow, in other words, you're supposed to be doing your work and you decided you weren't going to do your work and went off and played with the toy, the toy disappears. Nobody can play with it.
Mm.
Which is a very huge motivator, especially your 4-year-old.
Well, I wanted to go back to this. The interesting thing that you just said, I want to kind of pluck out of there, is that you said is that once you set this framework up, everybody trusts that they will get their turn. So you can put patience into the fore because you say, well, if we are all agreeing upon this set of rules, and that's how societies are in essence formed. You agree on some set of rules. The rules are, A gets to play with it for a period of time. And we agree upon that. We might negotiate 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever the heck it is.
Well, usually we don't do that because then they would be more concerned about the time instead of just playing. And there's an internal thing that just says, okay, I'll let such and such. He can have his turn next. And the interesting part about it is they all try to make sure that everybody gets a chance.
Right, but I mean, the faith in the system is what drives that.
Right.
And so what underlies any societal contract is that we all have to believe that everyone's bought into it. And where injustice comes in generally with societal contracts, is where you see where even though we all say that we're going to respect this group of rules, that there's this sort of priority interrupt, or there's this sort of, well, this one's more special than everybody else. So the basis of all social contracts is that everyone has the same right to the toy. We all could say, well, excuse me. We could all say that we got it first or whomever, but the contract that we are kind of espousing is that we all have the right to this toy equally.
Right.
And so once we espouse that, then we say, well, okay, I can see myself in the other. The other is playing with the toy. I wouldn't want somebody to take it away from me because somebody else wanted it. So you say, okay, let's negotiate. Well, you play with it, and then when you're done, you'll give it to me. Okay. And the buy-in is that you acknowledge that yes, this person had it first, and therefore has every right to play with it as I would if I had it first. So we're equals.
Right.
That we know that when they're done, and everyone finishes with something at some point, then I'm next. And so we bought into this whole thing, and that the trust in the contract, the trust in the system, is what drives it all. So at the basis of economics and the basis of even the social contract about the toy is trust that we're all equal and that we're all bought into the system, that we're all going to follow the rules. So when you break that trust, you lose faith in the system, and that's how systems like this collapse. Once you see that, for argument's sake, the rule of law doesn't apply equally to everybody, then there is no more rule of law.
It's true.
It's the way it works.
Yeah, mayhem.
It becomes chaos. It becomes mayhem. If you see that everyone else has to pay $5.99 for something, but this special person gets to pay $1, and you say, well, why? Why are they special? It breaks trust. Mm-hmm. If there's no agreement, yet there's some abrogation of the rules which seems arbitrary, or based on favoritism, or based on this one being artificially made more special than somebody else, this is where you break systems.
Right.
So we've gone off the rails a little bit about contention, but
well, no, actually we haven't. This is basically describing that it's quite natural to want to establish your boundary, but you have to acknowledge the fact that everybody else is there as well.
And equally has as much right as you do. Right.
So we have to work together in order to get it. And usually what happens is, the kids, they don't want to wait. They sit there and they just want they want to scream, or they want to, and everyone turns and looks at that person and says, it is hard to wait, isn't it?
Right.
And just that simple acknowledgement of, yes, it's hard to wait. It's like, well, okay. And then they go off and they occupy themselves until it's their turn.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that beginning part of understanding that, well, this is how we all function. We all function this way.
Right.
We want fairness. I mean, my goodness, children, that's not fair. That's usually the
that's the rallying cry. It's not fair.
It's not fair. They want fairness, you know. And what is fairness? They've all agreed to all those rules, you know, and they want consistency in its execution. They will be the first one to point out any transgression.
It's true, and this is a self-reinforcing system, and among the best systems are like that, because again, the egalitarian, in using this phrase, which people have corrupted in many ways, but the egalitarian enforcement is incredibly invisible. When everyone agrees on a set of rules, and if somebody is breaking the rules, you don't bring in some sort of arbitrary authority that makes some sort of weird call. You just say, hey, everyone here is following the rules. What's up with you? And that usually tends to correct almost invisibly, you know.
For the most part, once they have their own self-control. But sometimes it's just the attitude is I don't want to play with that, or I don't want to share with you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take it now. And when that happens, that's when you're trying to teach that, okay, you need to get a teacher, or you need to get an adult, or you need to get somebody who can help you handle this situation. And then that's when everything stops for those two that are having the problem. And everything is restated. And it is acknowledged that, well, you snatched it. You were taking it away. And it's usually, well, I thought he was done with it. It's like, were you done?
Right.
And it's acknowledging. See, that's the thing. You're acknowledging that the other person has a say. If he says he wasn't done. He may have put it down because he was trying to, like, tie a shoe or you know, scratch a bite or something.
Yeah.
And the other kid just grabbed it, because that's the other thing, is if you put it down because you're done is one thing. Putting it down because, you know, you were doing something else is another.
Yeah.
So the question always is, are you done?
Right. And what you teach, of course, is that that's part of the negotiation. The doneness has to be acknowledged on both sides.
Right. Because you're both equal, and you
Exactly.
wouldn't want that to happen to you.
Right. But the other thing I like that you mentioned is that when the rules are broken, and you have now, this is a different kind of contention. Now instead of the agreement, the negotiated contract, we've broken the contract in some way, shape, or form. One has snatched from another, and this actually goes right to the heart of the social contract, which is enforcement, and the actual subtext of a social contract, which is a more or a morality. There's a rightness and a wrongness to a social contract. The wrongness of part of the social contract is when you break it, and then there's nuance, which is, you know, why and how and where. But if you said, I will do X, and you don't do X, or I won't do Y, and you do Y, you break the trust, because you've given part of a social contract is the words, the commitment, and it can be many various ways, but usually it's a promise. You say, I will follow, you will follow, we'll both follow this contract. You know, that's the basic agreement. Then you violate the basic agreement, and you have a contention. Now the contention is, we all agreed on the rules. Now it's a subtler contention, not a contention for resource. It's a contention for, we all agreed on the rules, and you've broken them. And then sometimes there's the contention, the argument back is, well, you did it first. You know, that we all know that one. Well, you said this, and you said so. Then you do need an arbiter.
Right.
So within almost all social contract systems, there's a method of arbitrating disputes. You see it in the Ten Commandments. You see it in Judges in the law. You see it in Hammurabi's Code. You see, so in every social contract, however vast, or whether it's just about a toy in a group of 4-year-olds, there's always an appeal to an arbitration. But the arbiter itself is still within the social contract. It's still within the rules. So arbitration is hewing back to the basic agreement. And you just mentioned that. You said, well, we go back and say, well, you said this and you said this. Yes, right? You both agreed on this. And then, so what happened? You have a witness. Well, this happened. And I assumed, there's always this,
Well, with 4-year-olds, they just tell you what they did. Okay?
Right.
You don't have to say, well, he's lying or whatever. That doesn't even, it's like, no, I wanted it, I took it. It's like,
much more honest. Yeah.
It's just, you don't get into all these machinations that the mind comes up with.
Right.
It's like, we're dealing with just what's happening right now. We're not worrying about, whether or not you're lying. Now, the thing is, when they start lying, or they try to make up a story, everybody looks at them and just says, is that true? And then they stop for a second and they hang their head and say, well, no. I actually did it this way.
Right.
It's just, it's not an accusatory, because that is the spirit of contention. When you are trying to prove that
you're right.
That you're right and that person is wrong. Instead of just, okay, let's figure a way that we can all work it together. Because I know you want to play with it and I want to finish playing with it and you can have your turn.
Well, but so during this period when there is some contention, you can have an arbiter, which is a disinterested third party, generally speaking.
Usually.
And this is what our system, if you look at the large, but in the context of a preschool, that arbiter is usually an adult, an authority figure, who is seen to be impartial and seen to be only reminding both of the contendors of their mutual contract, of their mutual equality, of the fact that the shared resource was already negotiated, and that we have to hew back to the contract. So all that's it sounds very complicated, but it's exactly what Margaret just said. You merely say to each person, is that what happened? Did you do what you said you were going to do? And if you get complete honesty back, then usually that's what diffuses the extra contractual contention, because we had a agreement. Then we went outside of it. What causes people to go outside of the agreement is generally ego. They generally want to look at the other as less than.
Or I'm more important than everybody else.
Which is, basically the same thing.
That's the truth,
they want to assign to themselves a special category. I really needed it.
Right.
I was feeling bad and I needed it. And they'd put it down and it's my turn. I'm going to say when it's my turn. I get to be in charge. No longer the contract. This is the movement towards the egoic I, which is the not the being I, but the egoic I, which says I'm more important. This one, they don't really need it. They're not really using it. I want it. I feel sad. I feel happy. I need it. And all the I's come up, and they tempt the ego to step in and do something which is extra contractual, which is I'm going to grab it. And that spirit of contention is the one that feeds the pain body, that if you don't stop it right there, you break trust in the contract and you go from a contractual, in essence, a societal contract where we all agree what's going to happen, to chaos. So once you move away from your pre-negotiated contention towards a anarchical or chaotic contention, you see that the pain body arises, that the ego I, the little I, starts to take control, that it rapidly devolves into a unstructured free-for-all. And oftentimes what happens with the shared resource is it is merely destroyed. It is no longer shared, it's no longer even available anymore, because part of that shared resource was inherent in the social contract. You have to say that yes, we all want to do X, but there isn't enough X for everyone to have one at the same time. So time is important in contracts, generally speaking, as Margaret mentioned. And since we all want it, and we're all equal, see, we build up from that. We say we all want it, we're all equal, we have to figure out a way to make this work. But if the ego comes in, the egoic I, and says, we're not, the first statement of the egoic I is, we're not all equal. I'm special and they're not.
Mm-hmm.
So the ego loves that exact phrase. It elevates itself and denigrates all others.
Right. In their world, they are the most important thing. That's why when you're bringing these 4-year-old worlds together, your first step is to get them to understand that you want to play with your friend. Yes? Yes. Okay. Well, your friend has to be considered as well. And what they want to do, you must ask if they want to play. And the old, you have to keep your hands to yourself. That was how you started it. But what we're trying to teach is hands of kindness. Whenever you're doing something with your hands, it should be kind. It should not be anything else but kind for a social situation. So that kind of an awareness is it's usually the first step to let them know that, well, okay, if you want to play with your friends and you guys want to play together, you have to be considerate of each other.
Yeah.
You must ask, and they have to say yes or no. You can't just go over with the water bottle and squirt them.
However much fun that would be. So the basic in this goes to the heart of it. There's something known as the golden rule, which succinctly stated is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, that sounds sort of archaic, but what it really means is that we're all equal. And if you wouldn't want this done to you, don't do it to another. Once you kind of inculcate that into any society, any number of people, once you basically say to them that the very ground truth is that all of our lives are equally precious, that all of our time is equally valuable.
Everybody counts.
Everybody counts.
Okay,
the same.
Well, right, but everybody counts. So that's the first thing that usually flies out of the thought pattern when they really want what they want, because they're thinking about what they want. But everybody counts.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what your particular opinion of the person may be. That rule is part of being in this school situation.
Yeah.
Everybody counts. If you do not understand that, or you disregard it, you believe that nobody else counts but me, then you are removed from the situation. You're breaking the basic rule of understanding that this is another person. So if you're going to not treat people as people, then we have to remove you from this situation, and you cannot interact with them. And you can't engage with the toys. And we're going to remove you from the situation. We're going to sit outside for a few minutes, and we're going to let you get a hold of yourself. Because usually there's, it's a 4-year-old, so they go into a tantrum.
And this is of 4-year-olds, absolutely true. But then, if you look at society broadly, when you talk about sociopathy, and not psychopathy, but sociopathy, sociopaths, and narcissists.
Oh, narcissists.
And those and the spectrum of those two disorders, they both have their root in an inherent feeling of superiority to all others. So they're at their root, the ego has determined that all others are inferior. And then the consequences of that, with either narcissism, clinical narcissism, or clinical sociopathy, is that you substitute your mores and your desires for all social contracts. The sociopath doesn't respect any social contract, although they may, and this is the part of the clinical aspect of it, they may appear to, they try to look like they're operating within the rules, but then whenever the opportunity arises to rewrite the rules in their favor, they do.
Right.
Narcissism, which is another sort of ego disorder, really looks at all others as being less than, and the supreme ego, the supreme arbiter of what is right and wrong, is the narcissist themselves. So you're trying to train the 4-year-olds away from these tendencies, but in the broader society, these types of disorders, these sort of psychological disorders, and there's a spectrum here. The person who tries to always dominate the conversation with their opinions and doesn't allow anyone else to speak, or doesn't, denigrates everyone whenever they say something, and their words are always golden. This is on the spectrum of a narcissist. It isn't necessarily full-on blown clinical narcissism, but it's an ego which is out of control to some extent, which looks at others as, bad ideas come from where they come from is from other people. All other viewpoints are inferior to mine, and then you have sociopaths that in essence say that the rules only apply if I feel like following them. So the rules are arbitrarily assigned to, or rather the rules are not enforced by some sort of social contract. They're just convenient. If it's convenient to follow the rules, and I'm still getting what I want, I will follow the rules. But whenever I feel that the rules are going to in any way inhibit me from getting what I want, then the rules go away. Then I make my own rules.
Yes. And the children are right at that point where
Correct.
They're trying to figure out whether or not they should be doing what they're doing. And it's very interesting because that self-control that's needed in this kind of social situation where you're socializing the children, sometimes it doesn't exist in their own home life.
True.
There's everybody's dynamic at home is different, and it's because it's a family and they have certain ways of operating. But the question arises, do you want your child to be able to navigate all these social situations? It doesn't mean that they become, docile or a doormat, but it means allowing who they actually are internally to be able to be expressed in this situation. In other words, you have quieter children who are much more internal, and they have a tendency, whenever anything goes wrong, they'll sort of pull back a little bit and look at this and examine it. Then you have those that don't have any kind of self-reflection whatsoever, and they just go shooting off into whatever is happening at that moment. And of course they want to be the center, but it's like, no, what's going on? No. Usually it works out because they're all quite happy to see each other, and they realize that if you're not going to follow the rule of being able to count all your friends, then that's when that moment of self-reflection starts, where you're looking at it going, wait a minute. I'm not being included in all this. And why? And usually you're told very frankly, this is why.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's sort of the enforcement phase of it. One thing we kind of wanted to get into a little bit, and we're unfortunately the hour is flying by. So I think we understand now where the social contract is and how we buy into it, and how contention is managed there. But there's another form of contention. Once you get into, let's say you just mentioned the self-reflection portion of contention. There's an internal contention, which happens within people. Everyone is familiar with the internal voices, and we've talked about this before in many different aspects. The ego has a voice, and sometimes multiple voices, and these can be internalized. And in some ways, the ego's voices within your head can set up a contentious environment within the being. And all of that generally tends to hide the being itself, the actual space within which this is all operating. So this type of contention is a way that blocks the being from realizing that it is a being, that it is, that as a being, you are the same as everyone else. That ego contention within yourself, within your head, if you will, is what starts it's the genesis of this sort of, well, I'm more special than the other one.
Okay, wait. So what you're saying is, if you take an individual and they begin to observe what's actually going on within themselves.
Correct.
You're saying that the ego is contending for the attention of the consciousness.
In some ways, yes.
Or they want to drive the car. That's the analogy we've used before.
Right.
Whatever, or use the mouth.
Exactly so. And to the extent that there's contention within, you see that reflected externally. You see people whose external conversation is obviously not driven by actual events, because a whole bunch of things are happening around them, and yet they're focused on this one invisible, perhaps negative event, which is not happening. It is either a future or a past event, but it is being used by an ego voice within their own psyche that is contending for the attention of their being by saying, well, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be this horrible thing, and this one is always right, and we're always right, and this one's always wrong, and these people can't be trusted, and this whole kind of internal contentious, non-contractual. The ego beings in there are not following any rules. They're all trying to grab the mouth or drive the car. They're all contending with each other for the attention of the being, and they're in essence clouding and occluding. And this we haven't even talked about our quote, but they're clouding and including the and sapping energy away from the consciousness. Your ego contention within the head can lead to a contentious contract abrogating personality externally. And I would say that once you internalize these contentious voices within you, they feed pain body. They take energy away from your actual being. They drag your attention into the past or into the future, into anxiety or into regret.
Well, okay. What you're saying is that the motivation is to feed the pain body at that point.
Yes.
And to feed the pain body, you've got to trigger a reaction, which is usually fear-based.
Yes.
If this doesn't happen, that means that they're not respecting me. Or if they say this, then they're dissing me. Mm-hmm. It's this, and then the anger rises, as well as the fear.
Sure.
And to understand that is something that only happens after you've gone through the experience. What we're trying to do is get the pattern down first before they begin to form all the pain body stuff. Yes. And understand that this is a tool by which I'm supposed to function by. And if you can teach a little one how to interact with another little one, which is an external thing, okay, that's that mirror thing, you will be giving them a tool to be able to look internally and see if they're actually doing it to themselves. Are you actually respecting yourself enough to hear what all these other parts of you are saying?
That's very wise. I mean, it's absolutely true that the earlier that you get ahead of, or that you interdict this kind of internalized ego voices and this redirection towards pain body, the better off you generally are. But if you're talking about someone who has not had the benefit of that training,
right,
and then what you see is that this person is suffering from a number of different internal delusions, internal ego voices, which are trying to promulgate a false reality. That false reality drives actions and words that have no relationship to what's actually happening around them. That's where you lie awake at night worrying about what's going to happen, or you spend your life in regret and bitterness because of what happened 30 years ago and what happened to me then, and how everyone hates me because of it, and blah blah blah.
Right. It's a constant habit story.
Mm-hmm.
That what we say, the voice, that voice of criticism.
Yes.
That really at its core is that spirit of contention.
Exactly.
That voice of criticism is the spirit of contention. And when you understand that contention basically is trying to raise discord and strife in order to feed that pain body, it's a awful thought that this low frequency is what is dominating my present state of being.
Yes. And if you're in the presence, you mentioned present state of being, but if you're in the presence of a person who has this issue, they want to drag your energy into their into this maelstrom, into this drama.
Yeah.
They want to suck it in. They want you to operate within the boundaries of this unreality, this not tied to reality. They want you to be afraid of what they're afraid of. They want you to be angry about what they're angry about. They want you cannot disagree, because then you become the other, you become wrong.
Well, they're trying to get an affirmation that their reality is true.
Exactly.
But in order to do that, they need more energy.
Right.
And the only way they can get that energy is, and that's all very low frequency, discordant energy, pain.
Yes.
In order to do that, they have to engage with somebody else.
Yes. And this is exactly what you just said. I want to just reiterate that the spirit of contention is not an external thing. It's an internal thing which you bring within. In other words, it's accepted into your psyche. It becomes a voice of criticism, or a voice of regret, or a voice of, and sometimes many different voices. It then takes up residence within you and steals your present moment, your actual moment of now, steals that away, or tries to. And as a spirit of contention, it literally drives your actions, your words, and what you do towards pulling others into this drama, plugging them into the story, taking their energy. And this is the little monk with the is that so. All the ego contention, the spirit of contention, that was trying to drag him into the ego story of you did this and you did that and it's your fault and now you have to do this and I own you for this and all this stuff. This is we all know people like this whose basic operating principle seems to be to drag you into their drama, to plug you into the story, to get you to react in anger or fear or to be angry at you or be fearful at you. And that whole, you can feel the spirit of contention coming out of them, and you can feel the low frequency and the low energy, and it always feels manipulative, and it always feels bad and wrong, and it is, and it can if you have your own latent pain body spirits and contention within it awakens them, or tries to awaken them very quickly.
It's trying to activate your pain body, your pain body, so that they can fight and they can get fed.
Both of them get fed.
Right.
Exactly true.
So how not to engage in this?
Exactly.
Because now when you realize that something is trying to take your attention and your life force and put it down this well-worn path of reactions that are always negative. There's no positivity in any of this. No. It's just, I'm going to fight with you. We're going to argue about this. And there's a part of you that understands, by the way, that if you take this on, you actually burden yourself over some kind of personal offense. Any kind of personal offense that you take to you is burdening you. And I think people don't realize that. They just think, oh, well, now I'm in conflict, so I have to fight over it. It's like, no. You don't have to accept it. You don't have to prove anything, because internally you understand what is actually going on.
Right, the reality of it.
The reality of it is this energetic thing is trying to trigger me so that I can feed it with negativity. And your spirit, your soul becomes burdened. So what that means is you're engaged with this conflict, with this contention. And because you've engaged in it, the rule is then somebody wins and somebody loses.
Correct.
Which means that energy is exchanged and it goes to the winner, in air quotes, of this conflict. But nobody wins in something like that, because all you're doing is activating this low frequency, argumentative, discordant hatred even.
Yes.
It doesn't do anything. You can't fight hatred with hatred. That was also something that Jesus said. You are supposed to fight hatred with love, because hatred's a shadow form.
Yes. Love your enemies.
And love is a light that dispels the darkness. So you don't have to engage in this conflict at all, so that your person is not touched in any way. They may try really hard to offend you, by the way, because they are desperate for a hit.
Yes.
It's like an addiction. This is an addiction. You need that drama energy. That person is looking for drama energy to feed off of.
Yes.
You don't have to agree to the drama. When you realize this is a story that's being written and you are being given a part in the play, you do not have to accept that part.
In fact, you mentioned how to disarm it. The disarming of the spirit of contention is that so. You basically say to it, when presented with the drama and here's your role and here's your script and here's what you have to play, you just say to it, well, is that so? And that in essence it doesn't refuse. You don't refuse your role. You just put it to the side and say, this is a role. This is not reality. The is that so is an appeal to reality. Now, you may not get any response from the promulgator of this story, but it doesn't matter anymore, because what Margaret just said is exactly so. You no longer accept the story.
Right.
Now, well, let me just finish. Does that mean that you don't have to do something in reality? Yes. Maybe there's a child that still needs to be fed, but instead of taking the child with, okay, fine, I'm going to be a... No, you let all the story go and you say, okay, in reality, a child, a helpless infant, needs to be fed. Okay, I'm going to feed the infant, but your story doesn't mean a darn thing to me. So I'm sorry, you go ahead, Ma.
Well, you refuse to take the bait.
Exactly, the bait.
Okay, you will be baited to defend yourself because they're attacking.
And defend yourself only on their terms.
And it's only on their terms. When you realize that you do not accept any definition that they're giving you.
Exactly.
And you refuse to take on the burden of their story.
And it is a burden.
It's a tremendous burden, honestly, because what they're asking you to do is to validate them.
Their unreality.
To validate what they feel is their world. And why are they looking for validation from an outside source? Because your world is formed with your own internal soul, spirit, divine connection. And that's where the source of your world's existence is. If someone's looking for validation outside of it, it means that they do not have that connection to the source within.
Correct.
And that's a very important observation to make. You realize that this is a hungry mouth, or a hungry ghost is what the Tibetans would call it. When a spirit is always striving after or a soul is striving after something in life, and they wind up, their body dies, they reincarnate as a hungry soul. And what the picture of the hungry soul is awful.
Yeah.
Because it's like this
scary.
It's ghost-like, wraith-like being, but it has the tiniest of mouths, and it's always hungry, and it always goes back to the thing that it was hungering for, going after. And
it's a spirit of lack, as well as contention.
Yes, but it's a sad state to be in. And
pitiable.
Yes.
Pitiable state.
Yes. So the Tibetans are hoping or praying that a soul will go into another round of reincarnation, and not as a hungry ghost.
Yeah, but this is a lovely analogy, because we're coming to near the end of the hour. But I just want to say that's a lovely analogy, because that hunger doesn't even have to be after discorporation. That the spirit of contention is a hungry spirit.
Yes.
It needs people to buy in. And you say, well, how can I not? I mean, they're coming at me. Your mere appeal to reality, is that so, is shuttering that whole thing. It cuts it off at the knees. They cannot come through you. At that point, you always are able to, if you stay centered and high frequency, say, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. It is not real. I will not add my energy to it. I may have to deal with you on a physical level, or some sort of, you come at me, I have to deal with you. But in not giving any credence to the story, well, yes, you cut off that, and they will go away, because if they're not getting fed, they're going to look for another hit. Yeah, the phrase that comes in is, the argument cannot rage on without a sparring partner. So starve contention of its fuel. Yes, and we've been starved out of our hour. Oh,
All right, we have reached the end of our hour. So I am Margaret.
And I'm Michael.
And peace to you all.